Hello, I'm Bill McGurn from the Wall Street Journal, and we're here today to take a deep dive into the challenge of America's inner cities. In one of his presidential debates with Hillary Clinton, Mr. Trump declared that he would fix the inner cities if elected president. But what are the problems? What are the solutions? And can anyone really do anything about it? Here to discuss with me is former Congressman and the former Governor of Maryland, Robert Erlich, the founder and president of the Center for Urban Renewal and Education, Star Parker, and Wall Street Journal columnist and Manhattan Institute senior fellow, Jason Riley. Thank you all for being here. Governor, let me start with you. The inner cities are largely a blue state affair. You were a red governor.
Yeah. With a big blue state.
Right. You know. Are the Republicans missing an opportunity here?
Bill, I would divide the question because substantively, our esteemed panel here, we can agree. We have the substance, we have the positions, we have the issues, we've had the leaders, in fact. We're all Jack Kemp fans, obviously, a profound influence on me. So substantively, with regard to policy, go right down the book, beginning with economic growth, and you have it. It's there. Politically, the connection has not been there. As a Republican in a blue state, I've talked about it, I've discussed it, I've dialogued on it, I've debated it, I've fought about it. Mike Steele was my lieutenant governor, as you recall, first African-American elected in Maryland's history. We talked about it with Congressman Kemp, we talked about it with so many people. And it's the connection has not been made, and we pay the price every 2 years at the ballot box. One conclusion is I've come to is it cannot be led, the connection cannot be led by a white politician. Mm-hmm. It has to be an African-American conservative who gets elected not in a white state or predominantly white district, but a mixed district.
Right.
And that's, in my view, would be the real concrete beginning block to
I'm not so sure that
I want to ask you about that, sir. Also,
well,
you've written also about how younger African-American voters are voting a lot more Republican. It's not a large, it doesn't break 20%, but it's larger than the overall vote. Is that right?
Well, today, I mean, we're starting to see a shift because where I deviate a little bit is that the African-American community is very complex. So you have a third that are actually polling center-right and have for the last 25 years. The message is where we are losing this particular community. This is not anything wrong with the business model per se or the issues as you're bringing up. This is directly the end result of no marketing as you would do in any other business, to go in and sell your ideas to a particular community. The reason that we're beginning to see that shift of youth and the millennial is because of the internet. They are starting to hear beyond the traditional voices that have said that they represented the black interest. This is where if you do not concentrate on any particular demographic group and or a target market with your message, then you will lose them if they're only here on one side.
Jason, let me, why don't you follow up on that? Whatever the Republican mistakes are in the inner cities, I mean, the African-American vote is across. It's not just the inner cities, they're in suburbs and stuff too. But when we're talking about the inner cities, they've been such a failure, and yet Democrats are voted in all the time. I mean, so people talk about Republican mistakes, but bad schools, bad economy, broken families. The Democrats don't really have a good record in the inner cities, right?
It's a poor track record, but they show up.
That's right.
I mean, the Republicans typically don't show up. They don't go to the barber shops and the grocery stores in these communities. They largely concede this vote to Democrats. Now, there have been exceptions to that. You mentioned Jack Kemp earlier. You know, we've seen exceptions to that, but they remain exceptions. And I think what you're seeing in terms of a political strategy is Republicans still believe they can win without this vote, and they can.
Or without a fraction.
It's a cost-benefit analysis.
It's beginning to get harder, though, when you start considering these states. I mean, you look at a state like Texas, for them to have to play there, realizing just recently that 60% of Texas is ethnic. When you look at the president himself having to go into Mississippi, I think that we're starting to see a movement with the leadership of Donald Trump that we are not going to just cede this ground as these cities are starting to grow and these ethnic groups are growing.
You make that point. With Donald Trump, I mean, in the campaign, he had some high-profile meetings with inner-city pastors and so forth. Recently had inner-city. Do you think, I mean, people like me are skeptical about what the federal government can do to solve the inner-city problem. I mean, I'd be more inclined to think whatever they're going to do is make it worse. However, what if President Trump just made more high-profile visits to the inner city and said, look at this terrible school, look at this charter school, or look at things to just highlight the issues.
I think they'd give him a shot. I really do. I think he brings a lot of baggage to this issue. A lot of people have not gotten over the birtherism stuff. They haven't gotten over Charlottesville, things like that. But I do think that a lot of Black Americans are open to hearing out President Trump. And a lot of people forget how popular his TV show, Celebrity Apprentice, was among blacks.
In this particular community, right?
Hugely popular among blacks. And I thought there was an opportunity for him on the campaign trail to go into these communities and say, you know, I'm a businessman. I can tell you why you have so many empty lots. I can tell you why those bodegas charge so much money. You know, I can fix this.
But Starr, he said in the debate, he didn't say I can help. He said I can be the man who fixes the inner cities.
And he's doing exactly that. We don't need him to go in and tell the black community how broken their schools are. They already know. What we're starting to see is activity of his administration. The executive order that he signed into law is telling every single department that has anti-poverty money in it that you need to go in there and find out where the inconsistencies are, where you can streamline. What he's doing through the tax bill now with this opportunity initiative, this what Jack Kemp called enterprise zones, which are now opportunity zones, to where he's saying they need capital. Now, I would prefer that they just reduce the corporate tax rate and not giving us 700 pages of regulations out of Treasury, but at least we're starting to see this momentum, and that's the reason that you're starting to see more nod from the African-American community towards
this substance. This is substance, right? It's opportunity zones, and enterprise zones, and tax cuts, and charter schools. So that's substance. We got that. We understand it, and to the extent we can make some progress, we should. But to quote Woody Allen, I think 85% of success in life is just showing up. Just showing up. And we need to show up, and not just in election years, and not just asking for votes.
But I also think that among a certain segment of the black community, and I'm talking typically about older black Americans, that vote is probably lost to
That's where it does
Republicans.
break down. You're exactly right.
But younger black voters, there have been Republicans like Rand Paul that have gone on to college campuses and talked to black students at historically black colleges. I think that's a smart thing to do. The younger black voters are where I think the Republicans should be targeting.
There's two aspects to it. One is winning young people over philosophically. The other is just the defense with regard to demonization. When the race card is played, it doesn't always work. So there's a defensive and an offensive aspect to it too, and it needs to be viewed like that, because what happens regularly, Republicans get demonized. Our programs get demonized.
But look what happened in Florida, because the internet is allowing us to supersede some of the language of yesteryears. When you think about someone like DeSantis, who got more of the African-American vote than his opponent, Gilliam, who was running as a black man, the first one ever. No, what did the issue boil down to? School options. You have the Democrat candidate who said, I'm shutting down all charters and all of your opportunity for money to follow your children to the schools you want. And DeSantis said, no, actually, I want to expand these opportunities for you. And he won that black vote.
But the great frustration is school choice. You know, the polling is that lots of African Americans support school choice. And then on election day, most of the time they cast votes for those who oppose school choice. It's just it's concrete as it gets. It drives you crazy.
Not this last time.
We could talk about. Let's move to some of the actual issues in the inner city. I mean, crime is obviously a big one. Having been in New York City and seen the successful reduction on crime, but it didn't come without costs and a lot of accusations that there's a war on African Americans by the police. I think that's harder to sustain in some Baltimore, right? You had
there was
and a
people just got locked up for walking down the street.
But Jason, I know you've written on the issue.
I mean, really? Yes.
So they expanded broken windows.
Yeah, they expanded broken windows to breathing while black. Yes. And by the way, that's one of the reasons. I mean, literally a quarter to 25% of the entire population of the city got arrested in 1 year. This was about 10 years ago.
2005.
It was beyond. It wasn't broken windows. It was getting numbers. It was statistics.
Broken windows was primarily not about stop and frisk. That was a tactic. It
That's
was
exactly
primarily
right.
about
Two different
restoring
concepts.
order
That's
and
right.
so forth.
That's right. And it was beautiful.
For these families, I mean, when I was at the New York Post here in New York, and I paid a lot more attention to city issues, the polls would come in, and the police chief then, Ray Kelly, was very popular in the African American community. He made a lot of visits, but I think he's mostly popular because he got bad guys out of vulnerable communities. I mean, that was really the difference that Giuliani and Bloomberg made. They didn't just patrol the good areas. They tried to take it to all the areas, the high crime. So
on behalf of the grandmas, you know.
So if you're a grandma trying to raise your 12-year-old, there's a lot of bad influences out. And you're not in a house with a doorman, an apartment building with a doorman. It's a challenge.
It is. My organization, Urban Cure, went into Chicago after the weekend of 70 shootings one weekend. Then you had a lot of bubbling up in the media that something needs to be done. So we had a town hall, and then we had a clergy breakfast the next morning. At the town hall, one of the grandmas specifically brought up your point, Bill. What she said is, look, I lived in this neighborhood 60 years. I used to be able to walk in the nighttime to the store down the street from my home. Today, the store is not even there, and I can't even leave my house in the day. This is the problem with allowing criminals out of jail early. This is the problems that we're starting to see whenever we have discussions about crime. We don't talk about family breakdown, and we don't talk about unionized police forces.